You're listening to Parasearch Radio, news, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio. Parasearch Radio, broadcasting to the UK and beyond.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Haunted Histories with your host Penny G. Morgan, right here on Parasearch Radio.
A very good Wednesday evening to you all, and welcome to another episode of Haunted Histories with me, Penny G. Morgan, your host, here on Parasearch Radio. Last week we looked at Gettysburg and spoke with the lovely Cheryl Sefcik about her experiences of the paranormal there, and also the historical side of things. As you probably expect, or anyone who knows me would expect, I do tend to carry on chatting to my awesome guests long after we have gone off air, and we carried on chatting about Gettysburg and also the reasons for the American Civil War. One of the questions I asked Cheryl was to do with the current spate of attacks in the US on Confederate monuments, something which Cheryl was quite passionate about. She explained that the slavery side of things was jumped on quite quickly as being the main reason for the war, but Confederate leaders such as General Lee were actually anti-slavery themselves, and that General Lee actually supported the female members of his family, including his wife, daughter and mother-in-law, in their efforts to get freedom for slaves and also, most importantly, education. His main reason for getting involved in the Civil War was actually to do with states' rights, and many historical economists believe that it was down to federal taxation policies which benefited the northern states and were actually incredibly detrimental to the southern states from a fiscal perspective. Interesting, nonetheless, but it does beg the question, should history ever be rewritten to eradicate things which in modern day we find less than palatable, such as the slavery issue? As abhorrent as it is, and continues to be, after all, slavery does still exist. And there are a lot of events in history which we can look at now with our 21st century eyes and find that we cannot accept the way it was done. I'm not going to get into a debate about white supremacy, etc., which is what a lot of people blame the Confederates for, because I think that's a bit too heavy for a paranormal radio show. For the record, I don't believe in extremist anything. Live and let live is my motto. But the whole question of how history treated people is evident in my show today. We're going to be visiting a fascinating place called the Geffrye Museum with our friends Kerry and Steve from Fright Nights London. What is even more exciting about the Geffrye is that Fright Nights London were the first ever to visit and investigate this place back in July, and they have more investigations planned. So we're going to be chatting with them shortly. But before that, let's have a quick look at the Geffrye and what it's all about, shall we? Well, the Geffrye as a museum is probably best described as a museum for social history. It shows, in essence, home life from the 1600s to present day, with lots of different rooms set up in the style of that era, complete with authentic articles and pieces of furniture. I wonder if there's any haunted items that we're going to be able to talk about. But what is even more interesting to a historical enthusiast such as myself is that the Geffrye is set in almshouses which were built in 1714 by the Ironmongers Company, with a bequest from Sir Robert Geffrye, who was twice the master of the company and was also former mayor of London. For almost 200 years, the almshouses provided homes for around 50 poor pensioners, and they're now recognised for their historical importance as Grade 1 listed buildings. By the early 20th century, Hoxton, where they're based, near Shoreditch, had become one of the most overcrowded and potentially unsavoury parts of London, and the Ironmongers Company sold its Kingsland Road property to relocate the almshouses to a healthier area for its residents. The site itself was bought by London County Council, who wanted to provide public open space in such a densely populated area. Leading members of the arts and crafts movement petitioned the council not to demolish the almshouses, and they were converted into a museum which, believe it or not, opened over 100 years ago in 1914. One of the almshouses has been restored and is open to visitors. It's been taken back to its original conditions and offers what you could say is a very rare glimpse into the lives of London's poor and elderly in the 1780s and 1880s. If you want to go and visit, you can look up the dates when it's open on their website and book accordingly, but do so quickly, as the museum is going to be shut from the end of this year for refurbishment. It will be reopening though, fear not. But this leads me to question, what's the actual difference, in its day especially, between an almshouse and a workhouse? Well, in a nutshell, basically an almshouse, as evidenced by the fact that it was Sir Robert Geffrye who bequeathed the funds for the Geffrye houses, was normally from a charitable donation from an individual, whereas the workhouse was either a parish-driven operation or, following the poor unions, something that was more county-driven, such as places in Ongar, say as the Ongar Workhouse or the Chelmsford Workhouse. If you're interested in this and the history of them, do have another listen to my show earlier this year on the Ripon Workhouse, which does explain it a bit further. Almshouses also tended to be for a different type of person to that which went into the workhouse. Whole families went into workhouses and were expected to, funnily enough, work for their keep, hence the name, a workhouse. Whereas almshouses tended to be more for the elderly who couldn't work anymore and couldn't earn enough to pay rent. And it was also so that they could stay in the community from whence they came, so they didn't have to leave or go elsewhere. Sir Robert Geffrye was not just twice the master of the Ironmongers Company, as I mentioned. He was also Lord Mayor of London in 1685. He was actually born in Cornwall, believe it or not, but he died in London in 1704, having made a fortune in overseas trade. He had left a substantial endowment for the almshouses that were built and that we're going to be talking about when we talk about the Geffrye Museum. And although these were converted to the museum in 1914, the company then built new almshouses at Mottingham in Kent, which in turn were sold in 1972 to the Greater London Council. Now what's even more interesting is the Trust still owns two almshouses in Hampshire, one at Hook, built in 1976 and enlarged in 1987, and one in Basingstoke, which was opened in 1984. And these provide sheltered housing for 125 retired people of limited means. There are resident wardens at both homes, and the overall management is carried out from Ironmongers Hall. So that kind of shows the difference, the fact that there are still many, many almshouses everywhere you look, if you look carefully. And most of these, if not all, are run by charitable associations who vet the applicants, still lending themselves to home those people they were originally designed for. Those who have limited ability to earn funds themselves tend to be over 55 and living independently. I've seen some which may be for women only. Some may be for men who were in certain occupations only. It depends what the charity is driven to home. So unlike the workhouses, almshouses do still exist. And just to quantify, this is alms spelled A-L-M-S and not arms A-R-M-S. A mistake a friend of mine made when I was explaining them to her. She got very confused when I talked about almshouses. She thought I meant weapons. I suppose you could say it's an early type of social housing, although the rules governing them are a lot stricter and haven't changed much, many still operating under those requirements set by the original benefactor. So now I've probably bored you silly talking about the difference between almshouses and workhouses. Without further ado, let's speak to our friends from the Fright Nights crew. Oh, that rhymes, I've just realised. Without further ado, let's speak to our friends from the Fright Nights crew. Hi guys, how are you? What have you been up to
Hello.
since we last spoke earlier this year? It seems like ages ago.
It does, yeah, it's
definitely.
flown by. We've had quite
Hasn't
a
it
few events
just?
going on, yes. So we've been quite busy. We've did another visit to Ragged School
Oh yeah.
back in June, which was a fantastic night. It surpassed our first event there in January. So yeah, that was pretty amazing. Then we did a night. We did Fort Horsted as well. It was our first event there this year. That was pretty good, and we've got a couple more coming up to go for the rest of this year. Then we did Avenue House, another very active location.
Definitely.
And then, of course, the Geffrye in July. So, yeah, we've been pretty busy.
Very.
So what new places have you been to then that were new to Fright Nights London?
It's only the Geffrye that's the new one. We are in talks with a couple of other places in London.
Yeah.
Just to sort of see, what we can do. There are places sort of open to us, but it's just really making it cost effective to get people to come along, really. And that's unfortunately with London and being, what it is. Costs can be quite high to sort of hire these places out. But no, we've been quite lucky with some of our venues, and they're fantastic places.
I know what you mean about the cost, though. I looked at hiring out the Docklands Museum,
Yes.
and they were quoting over £3,000, and that wasn't even for the whole night.
No,
That's
not unusual.
That's a lot of money, isn't it? For
Some of them run into tens of thousands of pounds, which are fantastic for corporate events. We do corporate events as well, and sort of looking at that at the moment. So the bigger places are, a possibility for bigger venues, bigger events, bigger companies. We may be able to do that, but when we're sort of sticking to our sort of our paranormal events with the public, we do tend to keep it to sort of a maximum of about 30 people.
Yeah.
And, the venue has to be fitting in with that, really. So, but
the
we
thing
are
is, when you've got somewhere that's going to cost £3,000, you probably need, nobody's going to want to pay £100 to do an investigation anyway, and that only breaks you even. Well, not even that, because you've got obviously insurance and stuff to pay.
Yes, yeah.
So you've either got to up your numbers and get a ridiculous amount of numbers, so it almost feels like, well, there's a blooming nightclub going on in the place. You've got that many people in here. Or charge so much money, nobody will want to go.
Yeah, it's not what we're about, really. We want to give people the genuine feel and the experience of investigating a venue. I mean, we were in talks earlier on this year with a London theatre, not central London sort of thing. It's East End. And they were lovely, and they dropped their price right down for us, but it still was just too much to have 30 people. And before you know it, they then wanted to have like groups coming in every hour, their bar open, and it just unfortunately becomes, like you say, a bit more of a sort of a show.
Yeah.
And that isn't what we're about. So we're just still sort of finding our feet this year and getting some new venues sort of on the books is our biggest aim at the moment, and that's what we're working towards.
So you mentioned you're going to be doing Fort Horsted again.
Yes.
When's that coming up? Because was it? Now I might be wrong. I might be imagining this, but wasn't Fort Horsted on an episode of Ghost Adventures?
Yes, it was.
Yes, it
You're
was.
right.
Okay, I thought
Yes,
it was that one.
yeah. It's a really unusual location for anyone who's been to any of our other events. It's really different. It's where it's a fort. Obviously, it's quite dark, naturally dark, even in the daytime, and obviously a lot of it's sort of outside, open to the elements at times. But it's such an amazingly active venue, and we had a blast when we went there in
we've had
May.
some amazing results from that place.
Yeah,
Definitely.
and we're going back.
Didn't they hear on the Ghost event? I can't remember if it was Zach or one of the others. Heard voices in one of the tunnels, and they actually recorded hearing a conversation.
Yeah,
Yes.
that is one of the common things that actually does happen. We as well had heard distant conversations and stuff like that. Mimicry of lighting as well was a new one for us. We had K2s flickering, but the lights were then moving round the room, but the K2 was still in the same spot. So that was quite interesting. I've not seen it in my history of ghost hunt, paranormal investigations. It was quite a unique thing to see. A bit of mimicry.
And we're talking in a dark, obviously a tunnel. There is no natural light at all, so it is pitch black.
Yeah.
Amazing.
We counted for everybody. They're all
Yeah.
standing behind myself at the time, and everyone was seeing the same thing. And this light was moving round this doorway, and then it got to the stage where even myself stood in front of it and put my hand on top of the K2, and including one of the other people, and they put their hand on the K2, and you could see the lights going round them. You knew where they were, but it was going round them. But they couldn't see it, so it was really interesting. So
yeah, we've got sort of tickets left for October and November for Fort Hosted, but there's been some sort of issues to do with the people who are running it, and they've, I think, due to ill health, so they look like they're stepping down at the end of this year. So it is under question as to whether they will have further events in the future. So if it's something that, you know, that's on your to-do list, I would suggest sort of doing it this year, because we just don't know if we're going to be able to go back there next year.
It's in Kent. Is it in Kent?
It is, yeah, Chatham.
Chatham, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So no, it's definitely worth it. It's a great place.
It's a ghost hunt to do, definitely. Everybody that goes walks away not feeling too disappointed at all. The amount of people talking about it afterwards was immense. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And what dates is it on in October and November?
We've got the 21st of October.
Right.
And I think it's the 19th of November. Yeah.
So if people want to tread where Zach and his crew tread and see what they can find, they've got to get in touch, because it might not be available next year if the owners do step down, as you say.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be a shame if they did, because it is.
It really would.
We feel the same.
Yeah, there's so much history there. I mean, you know, some of the tunnels we can't take people into, but we've been lucky enough to go into ourselves. You know, we've got sort of graffiti back from the First World War. It's amazing.
It's phenomenal, yeah.
Is it a health and safety reason general public can't go into them?
Because a lot of it's in pencil. So if you literally sort of brush against the wall, it's gone.
Right.
So it is purely to preserve it. So
you're making me want to see it now.
It's amazing.
There's some drawings and stuff like that. Second World War, First World War.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. But we're lucky enough to see it, and it's beautiful. But
look, we're mates. We'd let so I could see it. Come on.
We'd do what we could, you know.
Yeah,
that.
I love you. So you've got a busy end of the year coming up.
Yes.
Ghost Hunting Central. But the one you've been to recently, you went end of July. Was it end of July? You went to the Geffrye? Something like that. I know. I was in Spain on holiday sunning myself, and although I was a bit gutted I wasn't around for that particular investigation, but you know, needs must. We mentioned when we sort of talked about it before when we were talking about booking this show anyway, that the Geffrye is virgin territory. It's never been investigated before, despite its history and all the artefacts that are in it. Do we know why it's never been investigated?
I don't think it's really sort of been on their radar as something they wanted to do.
Right.
We approached them earlier on this year, and Charles, sort of who organises the events there, he got back in touch straight away because he'd heard about us from Erica at the Ragged School. Mm-hmm. So he'd heard good things and wanted to meet up with us. So we went along for a meeting, and he was on board straight away, you know, saying, yeah, let's do this, and really quite excited about the possibility of seeing what it's all about. And it's been sort of amazing. We had really good sort of attendance, and we've booked for the 11th of November, which is our next event there, and we're already selling tickets for that one. So it's really been quite positive, and it was a really good night at the Geffrye.
Yeah.
So it really was just a case of convincing the people who run it that having a paranormal investigation there doesn't mean the place is going to get trashed. It's a bit of a way to earn extra money. And as long as you've got people you've got on good references, they'll take care of it.
Very much so. And I mean, their main concerns are, you know, the artefacts and the preservation. of the museum, and you know, we're totally on board with that. And
Yes,
again, because
exactly.
they've heard about the Ragged School and how we've treated the museum there, you know, and heard good things, you know, they knew it was in good hands. So and you know, they came along, you know, Charles actually joined us for the evening and had a great time.
Yeah, he was in on
Yeah.
quite a lot of the investigation. So
Yeah, no, it was very, very good there.
And is he
certainly
the curator then of the museum?
he just like the organising of the events and things. So yeah, it was quite, like I say, quite a new thing for them. They're normally sort of doing garden parties and things like that, but it was quite different for them to see in action. But no, it was very, very good night.
Ah. So I mentioned in my sort of spiel beforehand that the museum itself is kind of a social history museum. That's the best way
Yes.
to describe it. And you've got different living rooms, parlours, whatever you want to call them, set up from about the 1600s onwards, how they would have looked, the sort of artefacts they would have had in them. But that originally it was built as homes, almshouses for the poor. So such a massive sort of span of history or attachments to objects. You know, you could get everything from probably slightly more middle class people that some of the objects might belong to the poor that would have lived in the almshouses over the sort of 200 odd years that they were in operation. How much of the museum do you actually get to explore?
Well, I mean, we're lucky enough to explore the whole lot. I mean, the museum itself is shaped like a U shape, and the centre of the museum is an actual chapel.
Right.
And then either side of that, you've got sort of other rooms, and you have those rooms set up, like you say, like a parlour or you know, a living space. So you get a chance to immerse yourself. But what's quite unusual about the Geffrye is sort of most of it is all sort of one room in a way. You walk down sort of a sort of an aisle, and you then experience the whole thing in one go. It's sectioned off. So it's like they've sort of, you know, broken down all the walls so that all the old almshouses are now just one big room that you walk through. And then they're sectioned off into the parlour and living room areas.
Right.
We at the very sort of in one of the corners, which is sort of where we use our base, really, our sort of our base room, is sort of a cafeteria area, which is lovely, and that's quite modernised. So they're doing a lot of works to the museum at the moment, and like you said earlier, they'll be closing in January for 18 months. So we've got a chance to do one more event there in November before it closes. Certainly we'll be going back, but it will be once there's been a lot of renovations taking place. But they're doing a lot of work to the basement in particular. And it was the basement that we really wanted to investigate as much as the museum. It was the basement that had a lot of the sort of sightings in the past of spirits and ghosts. Experiences. So that was the area we were quite interested
quite
in.
itching to get down there and see what it was like.
And
is that open to the public when the museum's open?
No, it isn't.
Right.
We have exclusive access. So if you come on our events, you can experience that, but you cannot experience
we were the
it.
first public group for over 100 years to go down there.
Wow.
And it didn't disappoint.
Yeah,
So
it was very
Okay,
good.
well, we're going to talk about the experiences in the second half. I think we'll save that one because I'm writing down all the notes I'm going to ask you about. But the basement itself, did people live down there then when it was an almshouse? Do we know? What was it used for?
It was part of each house had a section of
basement.
basement,
Right.
and but it was some of the basement you actually have to bend down, and I'm only 5'3", and you know, I was having to bend down. So
but when you're small, I'm only 5'2.5", so I feel your pain there, Kerry. But isn't it nice when you're small and you have to bend down? It makes you feel tall.
it was great.
I feel like I'm like Gulliver, and I'm in the land of the
borrowers.
small people because I have to bend over. I love it. The fact that my husband's on all fours crawling is irrelevant. But if I have to duck, to get under something, I quite like it. Sorry, I'm cracking. Yeah, okay. But you're saying you had a gentleman there who was.
Yeah, we had some tall people who had to literally bend over, sort of double to get through. So it was quite funny, but no, it was actually really interesting to sort of look at the basement and see that sort of in its glory.
Is the basement still partitioned off then, or has that been opened up as well, the same as the building above it?
It's opened up. You can sort of walk through. Some of it we didn't do because it's sort of boiler areas and things like that.
Where all the electricity lines go down.
So we avoided some sections of it, but it's pretty much you just walk from one end. You could walk one end to the other.
And what do they use the basement for, the museum? Is it a storage area or...?
It's mainly storage.
Yeah, a lot of storage. Yeah.
They're probably going to use it a little bit more once it's, I guess, been opened up, once they've done their works on it next year.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in sort of middle of 2019, it'll be interesting to see what they've done with it, and sort of might be sort of more useful space for them, I guess.
Right. I think it's most museums need somewhere to store artefacts that they're not using at that point in time, which is why a lot of them do use these kind of areas, and that's also why they can be really fascinating, because they're full of this stuff that's just been left, and it's a bit like a treasure trove when you sort of go backstage, if you like, at a museum. Well, it's for a nerd like me anyway. I love it, but just thinking about the people having to duck, it's quite nice. I mean, you probably had this as well. When I've been in a shop and I can't reach something, and somebody tall comes over and goes, "Would you like me to get that for you?" It's kind of a smug thing when they bump their head because the ceiling's too low, and I'm walking under it completely with like loads of space, going, "Ha ha!" You know, it's kind of retribution. I think that's the way I look at it. Anyway, we did have a
few people sort of being careful because they were about to bang their heads. So yeah, we did have a few of that, but it made it quite funny, really, because it was quite a good talking point for people.
Yeah, I would be the one going, "Look, I'm fine. Here we go." One benefit of being a short ass. You're saying that the building itself all comes away from the chapel or something?
Yes.
Do we know what the history of the chapel is? Was that there? Has that always been there, so to speak?
It has, yes. It was when people were living there, you'd sort of typically have, like, it was sort of upstairs and down, and you'd have, I think, one person sort of to the left and one person to the right, and they'd have like self-contained sort of mini houses, I suppose.
Yeah.
And the chapel was always there, and there was on the end of the Geffrye, at one end there's a rather large room, and that used to be where the minister or priest would live with his family. Whereas the other rooms were only sort of single persons or widows, sort of, that were residing there.
Okay.
There's also
that's an interesting one, that they did have a sort of religious. Can't even think the word I was thinking of then, but someone there to give them, I suppose, religious sustenance or whatever it is.
Yes.
To sort of yeah. Okay.
But there's also a graveyard at the end where that section is. It's to the left-hand side of it, and there's and that's where Robert Geffrye and his wife are buried. There's only a couple of about 4 graves there, but once he had passed, once the sort of building had been completed, they actually they moved the bodies to be buried there.
Wow.
So,
that's quite a good tribute to him as well, isn't it?
It is.
He created it. He gave that sort of those arms to those poor people, and the fact he was there. Wow, that's quite a nice.
Yeah, it is actually
symbol.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a quick 30-second break now. When we come back after the break, we're going to actually start talking about the spooky stuff that was experienced in the Geffrye. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back shortly.
Hello, Harry Price here. Good evening. If there's nothing myself and everybody else enjoy here on the other side more, is the sit back and relax and listen to Parasearch Radio with its paranormal news, views and reviews from across the UK and beyond. Make sure to find out more about them on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web, whatever they are, to keep up to date with all their broadcasts throughout the week. And I hope you enjoy them as much as we do over here. Hello? Is anybody there?
And we're back. In the first half, we've been talking to Fright Nights London about the Geffrye Museum and the different bits that they were able to investigate, and things like the basement, and the fact that the benefactor who actually bequeathed the money to build these armhouses, now known as the Geffrye Museum, Sir Robert Geffrye, is actually buried there with his with his family. But what a lot of people probably want to know is what kind of spooky stuff happened whilst you were there. Should we start off at the beginning? Let's start above ground before we talk about the basement. And I believe are the almshouses attached to the main part of the museum, or are they a separate building?
That is actually the actual building. So museum is you're actually walking through them.
Okay.
So they've just sort of knocked the walls down, and you just walk through one to the other to the other. So sort of they've converted sort of some of it, but we started off the evening with a guided tour by Charles, who works at the Geffrye. And straight away, within about 30 seconds.
Yes, literally 30 seconds. We had we all stopped and were standing there, and all of a sudden we hear this little girl just chuckle straight away, and our sidekick at the time went, "Did anyone else hear that?" And everybody said yes, and nobody was recording, obviously, because we're just doing our first walk around. It's phenomenal. It was just everyone it was almost like everybody just get comfortable, right? There is, and there was this little girl laugh straight away, and it was just phenomenal. I mean, you could never have asked for something so quick, and obviously there's no younger people there to say, "Yeah, well, that's how I laugh," or "Sorry, I laughed."
Yeah,
but there wouldn't have been younger people living there when it was an almshouse.
No,
unless it was with the priest,
the vicars.
Yeah. Because we did ask,
or it could have been something attached to one of the items that was there.
Oh yeah, this is the other thing.
This is the other thing. We went through a couple of the rooms, and to go through the rooms, to explain it, it's like walking between houses, and each room is set up differently, and there is a different feel. It's in the same corridor, but as you're walking through, you get different feeling each room, which was really interesting. One of the rooms, our psychic at the time, he was very shocked to see a man standing with his arm rested against a fireplace. So he had to ask if the fireplace was actually from the house or moved there. And apparently it was moved there, and it's part of the same atmosphere as the room set. And this man is attached to the fireplace, which was really interesting. And he's just standing there, almost like, "What are you doing in my house?"
What age time was this room? Which of these rooms? Because I know the rooms they've got them modelled back from the early 1600s, haven't they? Do we know? Can you remember what time scale this room was?
Not offhand, but it was just he described him. He's in a smoking jacket. He seemed like he was from a much higher hierarchy of how people were living.
So probably mid to late 1800s then.
Somewhere around their sort of lines. It was just so, oh wow, hair slicked back, moustache. Just our psychic described him to a T and said, "He's so clear, but he doesn't look like he moves anywhere. He's just there." And he said, "I don't think he was here because it doesn't make sense because he doesn't seem like the other atmosphere I'm picking up through these other rooms." But he was just standing there, and it was so. He said it was so clear to see him. He said it was just a shock. He thought somebody had climbed over and was standing there all in outfit. He said somebody was mucking around, but none of us saw him.
No.
So it was. He said it was so shocking to see that, and he's a very experienced medium.
And was this spirit communicating with the medium, or was it just almost like a stone tape? You know, the whole sort of it was part of.
It seemed like he was actually communicating with him. He was shocked to see people walk through his house, but it obviously wasn't his house. So it's definitely something attached to one of the items. But throughout the rooms, I mean, a couple of people said, "Well, I don't like this room because it doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like it's the same era as the room set up."
Yeah.
And
I think it was a bit disorientating at times, I suppose, because you're walking from, one era to another. So, you're sort of going through that. And I quite like that about the Geffrye.
Yeah.
I think that's what, for me, sort of is the attraction. Because you've got so much going on there. But I think for some people it might have been a bit disorientating.
It was almost like a dizzy feeling when you went through some of the rooms. It felt like you were being pulled and turned all over the place. A lot of people did say they felt a little bit sick going through some of the rooms, and then it'd just go.
So it could be the actual sort of the items in those rooms which were carrying.
More than the actual house itself, because there was a couple of things that Psychic picked up, which was more related to the items over the rooms themselves. A couple of times he mentioned before going into certain rooms that he could pick up a man or a person standing there, which was more related to the items. So,
it's funny, it's all men though so far.
Yeah, I mean, we did get to the chapel. We did hear somebody shuffle their feet, and it did sound like male shoes. It sounded like a posh shoe. Somebody said it's quite interesting.
Yeah, like the stone on the floor, like on the tiled floor.
It's almost like they knew what sort of shoe he was wearing. It was really weird. But once again, when we got to the chapel, we heard a chuckle, and it was a little girl.
She was following you.
Well, she was always in front of us, which was really interesting because we heard her at the beginning room, and there was about 5 or 6 rooms before the chapel. And then as soon as we were in the chapel and the doors leaving the chapel, the chuckle came from that corridor again. So it's almost like, come chase me, which was quite interesting.
So did you get out the spirit box or anything like that to see if you could communicate with anyone?
We had a lot of people recording after hearing the little girl, and it was so clear people were recording, and we did, strangely enough, actually did catch people moving their feet or a person moving their feet, and we were perfectly still because obviously when we go to each room we make sure that we stop and then sort of feel for the atmosphere, get the psychic to see how he feels.
When we split up into groups, our psychic took the chapel and the room next door to the chapel. Steve went down into the basement with his group, and I did the equipment in the room sort of by the graveyard, so sort of the bigger sort of room, which is more like they use it for sort of exhibitions or training sort of now. So it's more of a training room. So I took my group in there. So we mainly used the equipment in that room, and then at the end we used it in the basement. So we didn't actually end up taking our equipment into the chapel,
right?
Because obviously other things sort of took our sort of our concentration and our sort of efforts into other places which were more active.
Yeah.
Have you got any plans for when you go back next to see if you can get this little girl to play with you, like taking a ball or almost like a Boo Buddy type teddy bear, that kind of thing, to see if you can get her to interact?
Well, I mean, we have used in the past, and still currently using, we use a cat ball, because if you roll it, you can hear it ring.
And they're quite light
and they're
as well.
quite light, so it doesn't need a lot of energy to move these things. Plus, it's got metal in it, so it's easier for them to move and stuff like that. And so far, we have heard a couple of rattles from it, but nothing significant to say that was definitely moving a lot. That was really moving a lot.
Yeah, maybe the Geffrye would be the one to change that.
Yeah, it probably could be.
I'm just thinking, if she's obviously sounds quite, he or she, could be either, I guess. Yeah. It obviously sounds quite playful. Obviously felt very comfortable with you guys because they were, they were either in front of you or trying to sort of, oh, you're back again, hi, sort of thing.
Yeah.
It might be, something like that. And I'd be interested to know after you've been there in, did you say it was November the 11th, your next one, isn't it?
Yes.
Do let me know, and I'll mention it on the show, because I find it, I think the fact that the Geffrye is Virgin Territory, and it's had so much energy ploughed into it with all the visitors as a museum.
Yeah.
But no one's really tried to sort of, pull on those spirits to get them to communicate.
No.
Did anyone do any individual rooms, like individual set? I know that it's not one big room; it's like lots of different, almost like film sets, almost. But did anyone do any particular one that they felt focused on? Apart, I mean, you mentioned the medium speaking to this chap who was sort of attached to his fireplace, but were there any rooms that anyone went into on their own or with one or two people that because they really spoke to them?
Not really.
No,
I mean,
not really.
people had the opportunity in their sort of free time to go and have a look around on their own. People were drawn to certain areas of interest, but there wasn't anything specific that came up in those areas.
There was in a couple of the buildings because they got a fake ceiling. Top floors they don't use. A lot of people did mention that they thought there was somebody up there looking down. So we thought, well, maybe their offices or maybe somebody's up there. So we did ask the question, and they only use it for storage of items similar to that particular room. And nobody actually goes up there. They need to get ladders to get the stuff up and down. So there's no actual proper access up there, so whoever they saw up there, they actually did see someone.
Yeah, because when you do the walkway through each room, that's sort of open plan above you, but you cannot see the second level in the rooms because it's got a false ceiling, so you can't see above it, but you can see that it goes up beyond that ceiling when you're walking through. And a lot of people felt they were always looking up above them, like somebody was looking down and sort of being nosy.
Yeah. But didn't want to come out to play.
No. But I mean, things, sort of next time might be a bit more familiar with us, and might get a bit more response in those areas next time.
It'll be interesting as well to see what happens after the refurbishment, because there's so many stories of when buildings get moved around or fiddled with, for want of a better term, that the spirits do tend to either come out to play or get a bit stronger because of. So it'd be very interesting in 18 months to see what level of activity, especially if you guys keep it as your building, if you know what I mean. So you're the ones who get to know everyone. That'll be a fascinating one to do, to see what happens after it's been changed around. I believe there's 2 rooms that are set up as what the almshouses would have actually looked like in 1780 and 1880. Now, I know that whenever people sort of think of workhouses, they think that spirits there are going to be miserable, they're going to be, down, they're going to be... And in some old workhouses, they probably are, especially some of the sort of the Lambeth and places like that, where it was a pretty hard existence. But when I've talked to one of the groups that we talk about, Ripon Workhouse, and also the feeling I've got when I've been to Ripon and to Gresson Hall, which is in Norfolk, is it's actually quite upbeat. It's quite a friendly feel. Now, almshouses obviously were a little bit different because people weren't. It wasn't that it wasn't an embarrassing thing to ask for alms. It was charitable as opposed to the sort of worst thing you could do. But what kind of vibe did you get from it? I mean, we're going to talk about the basement in a couple of minutes because I know you said that was a really exciting thing to experience, but what kind of vibe did you get from above ground, from the buildings? As I say, workhouses tend to give off, people think they're going to be very dour places, very down places, spirits are all going to be with you. Yeah. What kind of vibe did you get from the Geffrye?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag. Sometimes you get rooms that you feel very sad in, some rooms you feel very negative, very quite angry with. Some rooms they seem really quite pleasant, and you could sleep there. I mean, each room has got a slight different feel to it. I don't know if that's because of what's in the rooms or if it's actually the rooms themselves, but it did feel like it was very mixed because obviously you got all these houses joined up. They leak into each room to. It is a different feel to it.
Yeah, that's what makes it unusual as a museum, because you are looking at sort of so many different time periods. I suppose it's conflicting in one way, sort of spiritually, But as a museum, it makes it fascinating viewing and, you know, and sort of to look at. I overall find it I find the Geffrye a very positive place.
Yeah.
Quite an uplifting for me. You know, sort of more sensitive people will differ, but for me, I find it overall quite a sort of, it's an interesting place to explore. But overall, sort of above ground, it's quite a nice feel to it.
I know when I've looked at pictures of it, because I not had the chance to go, I think it's a beautiful looking building. I don't look at it and think, ooh, I don't want to step in. It looks an inviting building just to look at the pictures of it.
Yes.
The grounds are lovely. I mean, just to walk the grounds, it's such a lovely feel. You just feel happy when it's sort of weird. You just feel really happy when you're there.
That might be more how it would have been as the Arms House, because I do wonder if these conflicting feelings of emotion are due to, like you say, the items.
I think so.
You're in there, but if you're feeling positive when you're outside it, if you're feeling happy, if you're feeling content, I'm wondering if that's more the overriding feeling of what it would have been like when it was being used for its purpose.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Shoreditch and Hoxton is a very sort of changing area, and the area itself is obviously quite lively, quite sort of fashionable and trendy now. But the Geffrye really stands out because it's got, you know, sort of a lush green area at the front of it, and it's you know, it's lovely just to sort of, you know, sit in there in the daytime as well. It's an inviting building, like you say. It's not sort of you know, oppressive
ominous or anything.
No, it's really nice.
Quite a quiet place to be.
Yes, it is quite quiet.
It seems quieter than it should be, especially on the main road. You don't seem to hear the traffic. It's almost like it's in a bubble of time.
Yeah,
where you sort of
it's a little haven.
Yes,
it is. It's lovely.
Well, let's talk about your little exclusive of our little haven, the Geffrye, the basement, where the public don't get to visit. But you guys do.
We do.
Yes, definitely.
Tell me about the basement.
Well, obviously they've got two big sides of the basement. They've got one where the graveyard is, and then they've got the other end, which is near the modern end,
which is like the cafeteria area.
End. The cafeteria end, I mean, our psychic picked up more pagan sort of feel to it.
Really?
Pagan ceremonies, which was quite interesting because you don't usually hear that from the psychic saying, well, this is actually a pagan. I don't know much about pagan, but this feels like it's more of the earth and celebrating the earth and stuff like that.
That must have been pre the
buildings
then.
Yeah. But then we went to the other side and we did our split vigils.
Yeah, we split into groups, and Stephen took one group down to the basement, his first group.
Yeah, Kerry was in the rooms above, which is the big room, and our psychic of the night, he had people in the chapel. And I thought I'd try something different, because obviously we're in this location, we've never done this sort of thing before, so I decided to do a live vigil on Facebook, which I didn't cut. I kept it continuous. So when our first group was there, we had our glass divination going, and it was phenomenal. It was moving so quick. It was just mind blowing how quick it was going. But you did get a sense of an elderly lady in there, and she was not happy us being there at all.
Right.
Very, very strong-minded woman. We asked questions who she was and all that, and she didn't like me being down there, being more open than most people. She didn't like me. So obviously our first vigil ends quite quickly because obviously this glass is moving. We actually thought the glass was going to smash. It was moving so fast. People were actually, I think at one point there was one person on the glass, because it was moving so quick. It was mind-blowing. So obviously the first group decided to leave, so I said, right, okay, then I'm going to keep this rolling. So I stayed in the cellar on my own while we were swapping round the next group, and I kept it running the whole video, all 3 vigils back to back. And I was going around the cellar saying, look, the clicking noises you're hearing on this recording are the chairs because they're relaxing, because it's quite cool down there. Then you could hear noises somewhere else. So I walked down to there, went, look, I can hear these noises down here. And I just kept the video rolling. So if anybody's interested in having a look, we've got it all on our Facebook page.
The Fright Nights London page?
Yeah, Fright Nights London page.
Okay, wow. And that didn't unnerve you at all?
Yeah, it did a little bit. It was weird standing in a dark room, talking to yourself, thinking, yeah, just don't do a horror movie and just appear in front of me and jump at me. 'Cause,
that would have been really good,
but that would be fantastic.
That would have been pretty neat footage, though, Steve.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just tried to make sure that everybody could see the entire room. I mean, we do even use the cat ball down there, and I think it was our second group thought they heard it, the bell inside the ball rattle.
Yeah.
But we all checked to make sure it was there, and it was still there, and, you know, it hadn't moved. So it was quite interesting, but it seems like we got the same communication on all 3 groups. I mean, I even tried a couple of experiments asking similar questions, changing the wording, and it was still coming up with similar answers or same answers. So we knew we had the same person in this room.
So did this lady give off any reason why she didn't want you down there?
Oh, she just seemed like a very abrupt lady. According to what we were asking, somebody who looked very similar to me murdered her, which wasn't very nice because I'm the most placid, nicest person ever. And
it's always the people who say they are who aren't. You know, Steve. You should say you're actually a complete nut job, and then I believe you.
But I mean, to be the way I am, and then you hear that, I felt quite emotional in there. But when the second group came in, it changed again, and it's like, is this a different person? But it's answering the same way. We got the glass flying backwards and forwards. I mean, to describe it, it was almost scary seeing this glass moving the way it was, and people were shocked. We had, it was only me really from all the groups. I was the only consistency of that group, and the camera recording. Everything else was changing, and it was phenomenal. It was really.
We did our final vigil down there because it was so active.
Yeah.
We all went back down there and did our final vigil.
There. We had
the K2s and the spirit box and everything.
We had our psychic. We had all recorders going. We had independent people recording, EVP recordings. We had everything going, and even our psychic said this lady seems very, very strong, and she's not letting anything else come through. She's like hogging it.
And there was a few people down there he said you could tell that they were spirits that wanted to make contact, possibly even personal spirits from people who were on our event. But this lady was so determined she would not let anybody else communicate with them. It's really strange.
The thing is, though, if she had been killed, if she had been murdered, and the person who had murdered her did look like our calm and easygoing Steve, you can kind of understand why that would have gunned her into sort of like, no, you will listen to me. You know, I can't. I can kind of understand her being that vociferous, but it'll be interesting to see if she comes back in November.
Yes.
When I see it.
Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing what happens then.
You're just looking forward to him being scared again, aren't you, Kerry?
I'm hoping for a full manifestation. So
start small, Steve. Start small. Maybe get a spirit box going or something.
No, it was very good. We were very impressed with the for a first visit for the level of activity, because sometimes you find that the spirits can't communicate properly with you with a spirit box or a K2. They're not quite sure. But for the basement, and we had a little bit of K2 activity upstairs as well. And some voices recorded on somebody's recorded on their mobile. They recorded a voice upstairs as well. So Yeah, overall, I mean, for our first time there, I mean, it was brilliant. We loved it, and it was good activity.
So, for each of you, which was your favourite experience there?
I think it's got to be the basement. I mean, I only experienced it obviously as a final vigil, but I found that was because there was so much going on, and it's nice to see the group. I mean, there were some people that it was blowing their minds, the amount of movement on the glass. It was just like they couldn't believe it. Yeah,
talking about it.
They were. It's trying to sort of disprove that, because we did have a few skeptics, and they were very serious skeptics. They had an answer for everything on there, and they couldn't work it out, and couldn't understand it. But yeah, I think for me that it was the basement really activity at the end that was the highlight.
Yeah. I mean, I think my highlight was definitely the basement. It was just, I've seen glass divination, and this was just mind blowing. It was so quick, so it was just like you ask a question and it moved straight away. It was no
very
hesitation.
Determined, very very forceful.
It was very, I'm going to answer this exactly how I need to answer this, and it was like yes, no, no, yes, yes. It's spinning round the table, and you go, look, hold on a minute. Can you just stop so we can actually have a bit of a breather, because he's moving so quick. But I mean, each group experienced that glass move, and each person walked away from there going, I never pushed that glass at all. That was move. I mean, the glass, when it was moving, it not only was it moving backwards and forwards, but it was turning as well. And to have to turn and move backwards and forwards with the force that we had, it was out of this world, literally.
Brilliant. So what's the next event you guys have got coming up?
We've got Ragged School at the end of September, the 30th of September. We're really excited about that one, because our last one there in June, a basement. We had masses of activity on glass divination, and also we had some spirit box, some voices come from the spirit box, and then one of the ladies recording the spirit box also had voices come through on her mobile phone that we didn't hear on the spirit box in the room, that were answering questions that we were asking. That was very different. Sort of, you can tell on the recording what the voices were so different. That was a nice surprise. So, the last two visits at the Ragged School, it's been building, and I can't wait to see what the next visit has. And we've only got a couple of tickets left on that one, so we're pretty booked up.
So obviously, as ever, if anyone wants to book tickets to go on a trip with Fright Nights London, head over to their Facebook page or your website, and you can book tickets there. If you've got any questions about any of the venues that they go to, drop them a message. They're very nice people, and I'm saying that, not Steve saying that he's a very nice people. It's true, they are. But thank you ever so much, guys, for coming to talk to us about the Geffrye. I am gutted that I didn't come in July, and I'm even more gutted that I won't be able to make the November one, but give me 18 months and I'll be there.
I will be going back.
So don't forget Parasearch Radio on shows six nights of the week, all on different subjects and things to do with the paranormal and things unexplained. If you miss one of the shows and you want to have a listen, just go to the Spreaker app and you can listen to all our past episodes, even mine all the way back to April if you so choose. But all that leaves is to say thanks ever so much for listening, everyone. Good evening, sleep tight, and don't let the bed bugs bite.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.